From Coordinate Sport, it's the Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. We brought you this podcast initially because we feel now more than ever learning from the industry's top performers is vital. At a time where the global sports coaching market has the potential to grow by $4 billion over the next 4 years, we wanted to give our listeners first mover advantage, give you opportunity to create a community and drive forward an industry where so many benefit from the services you provide. Since we launched, we've been privileged to talk to and learn from some of the most inspirational and pioneering leaders from the industry. So being that it's the end of the year, we've taken the opportunity to go back and look at our conversations. Drawing out the most powerful messages and insights, our guests have passed on their experiences so you can fast track your growth, helping to set the stage and grasp all the opportunities available to you from 2021 and beyond. So, welcome to this week's episode. It's the last for this year, but it's the first of our Lessons from Leaders wrap-up episodes. We are all in this sector to make an impact. In the UK, we are in the midst of two huge crises. We all knew about the childhood obesity epidemic, but COVID-19 has shone a light on the holiday hunger that many children are experiencing. Two issues that on the face of it seem like they shouldn't exist in the same country, especially one of the wealthiest in the world. Rob Brown, Dean Horridge and Bryn Llewellyn share their thoughts on the subject.
When I first started, we had quite a few children in this school that were a little bit overweight. 2 years later, we never had one child that was classed as overweight. Forget obese, overweight. Why was that?
That was in 2 years, right?
Yeah.
2 years.
Every single child in that school did a minimum of 1 hour of activity a day. So all my children had to sign up for an after-school club 3 times a week. All had to be active lunchtime. It's not rocket science. The recommendation CMO guidelines, the Chief Medical Officer guidelines, are 1 hour a day of 60 minutes of activity, moderate to vigorous. Now, the definition to moderate to vigorous, let's keep it simple. You're out of breath and you're sweating. Do you know how many children go out for that wonderful time of lunchtime activity in school and sit down and read a book? And sit down and have a bag of crisps and sit down and actually do not even move. And we have an environment where we ask children to get up in the morning and have breakfast. Most get driven to school or don't really do much walking. They go into school, they're asked to sit down and listen. They go out to the playground, they're told not to run or use a skipping rope in case someone gets strangled. And please don't use a football. God forbid someone may get hit. And then they're asked to sit down and have a lunch. And then after school, they do their homework and they sit down and chill out on their games and they go to bed. And we wonder why we have obesity and issues.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science. We've got to get the kids moving. We have an hour a day recommendation, yet the minimum that schools have to deliver is 2 hours a week. Somehow, James, I don't know about you, my maths has always been quite strong, but 5 hours of recommendation in a school week and only having to deliver 2, you're setting yourself up for failure. So this whole perception around getting kids active needs to be addressed and simplified and mandatory in all schools, that actually your job is to get the children active for for an hour a day. Yes, 30 minutes are in school and 30 minutes are outside of school. But you know what? Schools provide both environments like I did 29 years ago, which was in-school activities, everybody's active, including in class, stand up and do some fun activities. But also after school, every child should have the ability to do an after-school club. And unfortunately, we don't have that in school settings because there's a charge to it. And a lot of parents, like I as a child, could not afford it.
Yeah, and I guess going back to your childhood as well, and probably mine, in terms of society as a whole, certain things that we could do or would do as kids, generally can't do. Like you said, people getting dropped off to school. I used to walk to school when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, play out in the street or cut a hole in the tennis court walls and stuff. Like that type of stuff seems to be disappearing. And I don't know whether... Yeah, it's becoming more structured and we've got great coaches working in the community, but the day-to-day, just more active lifestyle seems to be...
Well, there is no fun and there's no time in school, lunchtimes in many schools. I don't say all schools, I say many schools, where the children could just let rip, go wild. If I didn't go running around at half hour my lunchtime at school, I'd be off a roof.
Yeah.
And there's many children that don't, and they then tell them they're naughty, right? These are the children misbehaving. No. They're like a puppy in a cage. You have to let children run and exert that energy, which is built up for being sedentary. And I think the other environment that we have to be very, very careful of is that, homework these days, and I've got 3 young children, but I'm going back a few years when my child was 7 and 8. They used to come home from a whole day at school, getting home at 4:30, and sit there and do 2 hours of homework, which is just insane. Because first of all, some of the statistics around additional learning doesn't really come into play because the children are just whacked by then. What actually is more interesting is how much children learn better when they're inactive. Yeah. And somehow as a sector, we have to find a fine balance to go back to this, this education establishment and say, actually, active children learn better. Active children behave better. Active children sleep better. Active children eat better. I can go on. Yet we have a lot of inactive children around the UK.
And I know it's very crude to say that, but it's kind of true. Those kids who were access to the gardens, they were doing doing the bouncing and the speed jumps over the rolled up socks, etc. But for every child who was doing that, there was 1 or 2 children who weren't doing anything. And, Joe Wicks, bless him, he managed to get quite a lot of kids and families active and off their backsides and off their sofas. And I know he came in for a lot of criticism. He's not the nation's PE teacher. It was a series of high intensity interval training sessions, but at least he talked about it in terms of the emotional context and the nutrition context as well. So, yes, he came in for a lot of criticism and he made a lot of money on the back of it, but he did actually start to change behaviours. So I'll tip my hat to him there. Obviously, we have to convince teachers and school leaders that there are benefits to physically active learning.
Do you think that's more difficult now? Do you think that's getting easier with that? Obviously, we hear about it all the time, or is that just?
I think there's more people aware of it now than ever before, looking at social media. And I know the work of Dr. Andy Daly-Smith and other organisations partners with the Creating Active Schools framework. I think there's more people buying into that process now than ever before. I am concerned by I know Boris Johnson keeps on talking about, levelling things up. I would still harken back to the lack of a level playing field. So 3 years ago, I was invited down to DFE to talk about Tactivate and that initial round of research. And the guys at DFE said they really got it, but they couldn't share it and celebrate it because everything had to go through either AFPI, Sport England or Youth Sport Trust. Right. And even though they got it and they could understand it, they couldn't talk about it and celebrate it and share it. Everything has to go through them. But ultimately, they've got their own products that they have to cascade out. So I know that Youth Sport Trust, through their school games organisers, they've got a massive outreach. But ultimately, they're just sharing their own preferred platforms and programs and products. Yeah. So I would say, that's a major challenge.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm going to be able to fix childhood obesity, because a lot of people have tried, and obviously we're not doing a fantastic job right now, but we are trying. I don't think it's a quick fix, if I'm honest, but one of the things I would say is I think it's time we started to let the people who've got a real passion and love for sport and physical activity actually take care of the delivery of, for example, PE in primary schools, secondary schools, that kind of stuff, because often PE, and especially in primary schools, gets left to class teachers who might not necessarily have a keen interest in sport or PE, and it might be a secondary thought. So we really need to let those people who've got a passion for helping people get fit, understand sport and the rules, but also get involved in sport in a wider context as well, like links to clubs, that kind of stuff. We really need to start improving that aspect of delivery of physical education, I would say.
Data is now key in all industries. But when we want to prove that what we do is creating real change, having the systems in place to collect and evaluate participant data is essential. Preeti Shetty gives us a real insight into the need for culture change in our sector to ensure all organisations are able to evidence the impact of their programmes and services.
We've come a long way. The sector, when I say sector, I mean the third sector in general, has come a long way. When I first started, I would talk about impact or data or all of these things, and people weren't interested or they were a bit scared by it. then it became digital meant website and social. And that's not the digital I'm talking about, right? Those are very, very important things. But I think every organization now is quite comfortable with having a website and doing social, right? That is not the issue. The digital we're talking about, our end, and when we talk about digital transformation, we're talking your systems, your data, right? What we're talking about here is, what are the efficiencies operationally that you can have, from your end-to-end cycle, right? From where you start to when you finish. Where is your data going? What is it telling you? How is it informing future decision making? What do you know about your beneficiaries? I think that the sector has been a little bit slow to embrace. One, because, and this might be a little bit of a stereotype, but our sport especially, actually non-sport too, mostly volunteer-led, coaches love what they do, very good at it, don't like admin, don't like systems, understandably don't want to waste valuable delivery time by going and recording loads of notes. Like, I get that, right? I think they've been a little bit slow to, and that is changing. But I think they've been a little bit slow to embrace it. There are still loads of, I always say, when people say, who's your biggest competitor? Excel is my biggest competitor. With all of ours, without a doubt. Exactly. And Excel is fantastic. I'm not saying you should move away from Excel, but I think it's understanding where you are in your organization's journey and understanding whether, for me, I don't consider myself a tech person. I happen to run a tech business, but for me, tech should help us make our lives easier. And there are hundreds of things that technology can do that if it can do it, why would I waste my time trying to do it manually or doing it on Excel, right? So I think where it's changing, and charities have recognized that we need to embrace digital a lot more. And there are things it can give us, and it can buy us time, and it can help us do things a lot quicker. My concern, and I think the impact bit the sector has got, so much so that it's become a buzzword. And that's my concern with this is, you Google digital transformation and every charity seems to have a job going, head of digital transformation. What does that mean? Do you know what I mean? I don't think the solution is just to go hire a person that's going to come and fix everything for you.
Because if you're trying to save the time as well, if you're trying to save people time, then it should be the team that's already there, right? The system should be doing those problems, should be solving that problem. And so it doesn't mean, I need to bring in the tech guy to solve it. Maybe a culture change. That's
the word. It's culture change, right? Whether you do it by hiring somebody or you do it with your internal teams, the fact of the matter is it's not one person's job. As an organization, is your culture data driven, insight led? Is it tech focused? Those things don't mean you have 6 systems. It means the way you think as an organization and your employees think is putting those things first. It's saying, I'm not going to make big decisions until I look at what the data is telling me. I'm not going to create new programs until I get feedback from my beneficiaries. It's systems thinking. These things, it's not necessarily linked to a product. It's linked to how you deal with the people you work with. And I think we're getting there, but my concern is, will this become a tick box exercise? Yes, I have impact. You know what I mean? It's not a one-time thing.
Dean Horridge and David Batch are 2 of the most successful UK sports entrepreneurs, and they share their unique business philosophies with us.
You have to let children run and exert that energy, which is built up for being sedentary. And I think the other environment that we have to be very, very careful of is that, homework these days, and I've got 3 young children, but I'm going back a few years when my child was 7 and 8. They used to come home from a whole day at school, getting home at 4:30, and sit there and do 2 hours of homework, which is just insane. Because first of all, some of the statistics around additional learning doesn't really come into play because the children are just whacked by then. What actually is more interesting is how much children learn better when they're inactive. Yeah. And somehow as a sector, we have to find a fine balance to go back to this, this education establishment and say, actually, active children learn better. Active children behave better. Active children sleep better. Active children eat better. I can go on. Yet we have a lot of inactive children around the UK.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of leads me on. I was going to ask you a question around your own routine, and it does fit with that. So in terms of you're leading a business, and you have done from no employees to 650. I'm assuming you had some type of routine that used to help, certain routines, tactics, things that used to help you with your performance as a business leader. And I'm guessing that included exercise. I'm put myself out there to.
Yes, it's a good call. My wife would tell you very clearly, if I don't exercise every other day, she locks the door.
For me, there's 4 key pillars of any business, and it does. I said to you earlier that whatever element of the journey you're at, I don't think the challenges change; they just get a little bit bigger. And those 4 challenges are very much strategic, execution, cash, people. That's it. That's all I do. From a day-to-day basis, the strategic one is probably not one that you would end up dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But the other 3, certainly, the execution of that strategic plan, making sure that the cash is coming in when it should come in, making sure that that is controlled, same as any kind of household, same as any kind of business. You look at Dell Computers on that one. Michael Dell, I think he brought the company back after originally selling it and spent something like 3 years just working on that one pillar and changed the whole business round because they were spending their cash on parts, putting it into production, churning out a computer, giving it to a distributor or shop. They were then selling it, and so their life cycle of their cash from when they spent it to when they got it was inordinate.
Like 6 months or something.
Yeah, he changed it round. You go online, you press what you want on your computer, you choose it, you pay for it, and then he goes and buys the parts and builds it for you within 7 days.
Yeah.
And that was a complete flip. So that's really important. And then, of course, people, which either as a one-man band, you haven't got enough, and that's an issue, or you get to a point where you have lots and lots of people, and potentially, as we're seeing now with COVID and the impact of that, in some cases, managing people through that would have been and is one of the biggest challenges because you're dealing with people's lives.
Achieving big, ambitious goals requires the ability to build great teams. Rob Brown and Jack Shakespeare talk us through their approach to creating a team culture within their organisations.
If I'm honest, that's probably it. Not necessarily just that. Obviously, we've had the same issues to deal with as everyone's had to deal with. But I think convincing people that sport is a credible career choice for a lot of people, like convincing the students, but more importantly, convincing the parents that it's a credible, like you said before, I think my parents back then would have probably questioned and maybe supported me, but asked a lot of questions if I decided to do the routes that there are available now. But yeah, I think there are a couple of issues and there's still a few misconceptions around a lack of jobs in sport when there really isn't, I think. And that's one of the things that we are working on to, like I said, with our exit routes, to provide opportunities and showcase what the sports industry's got to offer.
Just changing angle a little bit now, just more on kind of your day-to-day, I guess, operations, business-wise. I don't know if you have a specific kind of approach to this or philosophy you live by or anything like that, but around, I guess, one big question that we have for the listeners is kind of how do you build a successful team? What goes into that? Build, I guess, maintain it as well. So I know you've obviously built out your team of tutors and the rest of your employees. How do you kind of keep that all together or successfully manage it?
Yeah, I think communication is extremely important. I feel like keeping a motivated and happy team is all about keeping them engaged, keeping people focused, giving people a goal to work towards, but then also having that open environment so that if anyone has any issues, they can always address them with you. I think that's one thing that we are at ISF. We're an open book, really. We like to discuss our issues. We have team meetings daily, especially during the pandemic. We had daily catch-ups, just one to make sure that we weren't going to go insane and only seeing four walls constantly when we're stuck in. Does that make sense? So you have that extra person to talk to, like that extra support network, and having that support network. So yeah, just being nice and open, but also trying to keep focus, keep everyone with a goal in mind. Like having the mission of the organization up on the wall is really important because it means that everyone can see that every day when they walk in and they know what they're working towards, and they know that we're not just doing this as an empty job. Basically, it's something that we're really striving towards achieving.
was a bit, well, crash course, definitely. But I think the biggest thing for me is just creating an environment of trust, absolute trust, absolute transparency, and shared vulnerability. If we really tried to focus a lot internally on those trusting teams, and really tried to focus on everyone within our teams having the confidence and the sense of agency where they can speak up. They have the information to speak up, and importantly, the confidence to speak up. My job is just to create that environment, create that culture where people feel confident. They've got the space to raise concerns, raise challenges, but equally, and just as importantly, often more importantly, be innovative, and have the confidence to bring new ideas to the table. That openness, that transparency, that sense of trusting teams is really important to us. And I think, over the last 9 months, where everyone's kind of shifted the way in which they work, and you and I now obviously doing this over virtually, I think that's been more important because you've gone from often working spaces where you have a meeting and then you walk away, but there's lots of conversations that happen in the margins, to now having a meeting on the computer and then everyone presses the finish meeting button and you're on your own again, and you haven't got that support network around you, and you haven't got that sense of validation about some of the decisions that have been made. So I think that idea of trusting teams and that idea of openness and transparency has become even more important for us, so that everyone within the team has the confidence, like I say, to speak up and speak out.
The franchise model lends itself very well to service businesses, especially sports coaching ones. And we had the pleasure of sitting down with 3 of the most successful. Hear how Christine Kelly, Eddie Ray, and David Batch started and scaled their franchises.
The point kind of, where I'd got to in 2003, where I had these 35 classes a week up and running, it was kind of then that I just thought, right, I can carry on as I am now, and I'm going to be pretty, run ragged by running this business and managing the people and everything else. Or I can look at other business models to grow. And I wasn't really familiar with franchising at that point. Like, obviously, I'd heard of McDonald's and I knew it was a franchise, but it wasn't a big thing actually really in the UK back in the early 2000s. But I kind of stumbled across it as a model and just thought, wow, this would kind of satisfy all of the requirements that I have around making sure that the quality of what we do is maintained as we grow, which is obviously the critical thing for a business like ours. And also, took a little bit the strain out of the staffing decisions, because, if you have a bunch of small business owners or franchisees and they all manage their own small teams, it's a lot easier than having, me managing a team of 50 people myself or something. So it kind of logically made sense from that perspective. And the other thing that I kind of realized, or that I liked about the idea of franchising, is that it really gives people the opportunity to set up and run their own business, but with relatively low risk, because everything's kind of been done for them. The concept's been proven. They know that if they follow the instructions that the franchisor gives them and the kind of template that they're given, that the business should succeed. And I realized at the time that there were, I wasn't alone in my struggle with work-life balance after I had my son. And I thought, well, there must be a bit of a gap in the market for other people like me who've gone back to work after they've had kids, but actually really don't like the fact that they don't get to see their kids grow up. And so I just thought it struck a really nice chord around, allowing parents to spend more time with their kids while they're growing up, but actually have their own business and actually have something that, could grow into something quite big and something financially meaningful for them that would really make a difference to the family. So yeah, and it turned out actually that our first, roughly 5 franchisees were all ex-career women who'd had kids, very similar situation to myself, had kids and just wanted to carry on working, but didn't want to sacrifice, seeing their kids grow up. So that actually worked out really well. It's kind of nice as the business has grown. We're now about 50-50 men and women are franchisees. So it kind of works for men or women in terms of the work-life balance thing.
Well, it's quite a liberating thing to do, actually, because if anybody's read like the E-Myth, which obviously talks about, every business should operate like a franchisor, picking through the systems, the processes, and going through every function in your business and actually systemizing it. And actually that was quite a liberating thing to do, is actually, pick apart every element and every function that the business does, so you can actually teach someone how to do it, give someone a manual, and off they go, and they replicate the same model in another part of the country. So that was a good experience to do. It's not a quick thing to do. I think we probably engaged with a franchise consultant for probably nearly a year before we actually launched it. There's a lot of sort of legwork to do, a lot of background stuff that needed doing. But yeah, no, thoroughly enjoyed it. It's helped us meet new people, widen our network, open doors. So it's been a good experience. I mean, as with anything, there's good bits and bad bits, but wouldn't change that decision.
And that was back in, was it 2009? You decided to start franchise, or you launched your first one?
Yeah.
Just to give an idea to the listeners, I guess back then it might be different, 10, 11 years ago, but in terms of the cost associated with that, do you mind sharing like kind of the monetary value it took to, or you could put on it, of setting up a franchise separately to the normal day-to-day business?
It might be more expensive now, but I think going back, just nearly 10 plus years, I think the engagement with the consultant and obviously all the legal costs was around about £25,000 to get the business, so it was in a position that we could actually franchise it. And then with anything, if you've got to kind of roll it out, then you need a certain amount of capital behind you to actually go and, market the business, whether that's attending exhibitions or marketing the business online, or whatever we needed to do to obviously start to grow the business. There was a cost associated with that. And that ongoing sort of marketing budget would be anywhere between £20,000 to £30,000 a year that needed to go into actually marketing that side of the business to actually attract people, to come into the network.
I think that's something that you see kind of organizations setting up franchises quite quickly, and maybe they don't put that diligent approach and getting everything, crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's before they launch, if that makes sense. And you kind of, it's good that you've kind of shared that so people know, like, it's something you can't jump into lightly, because I guess it's going to sting you later on if you haven't done everything properly.
Yeah, 100%. I think it sometimes becomes fashionable to do what our competitors are doing, doesn't it? Sometimes we look at people and think, oh, they're doing it, we'll do it. But yeah, no, there's a lot of legwork that goes behind it, and also with a lot of things, especially franchising, that you can not competing with, but you're sharing the same sort of exhibition space as McDonald's, and our budget is nowhere near McDonald's. But yet for advertising in certain spaces, that's the rate card, really. You are having to pay. It is expensive to kind of to do some of these things. So I think sometimes people do go into it naively, but I think, engage with a consultant, do your own research, read, speak to people that are already a franchisor, get that warts and all sort of account, really, and really understand what the good bits, the bad bits are, and then decide whether that's a route that you want to go down. Because there's lots and lots of pluses. You mentioned it, around growth. Yes, you can grow quicker. And obviously, you're not taking all the day-to-day costs on board, obviously, because that's taken by the franchisee. So there's lots of, positives to franchising. And for the right person and the right business, it is a good route to explore.
No, I wish I could sit here and say that I wrote it down on a piece of paper exactly what we do and how we do it, but I can't. Not what we did, but I say we because it goes back to that point where without people like those two guys and lots of other people along the way, none of it would have happened. You can't do it on your own. But pretty much for the first probably 7 or 8 years of the business, I operated the business as an owner operator, as a lot of people do, for good or bad. And I think this is something that we talk about with our franchisees. Is running a business is a journey. There's not many people, and certainly not many SMEs, that go out, raise 30 million to go and build a business that they're going to sell 4 years, 5 years later for 150. It doesn't happen often. It does happen, of course, particularly in software and things like that, but it doesn't happen much. The normal route, the route more trodden, is the one where you set something up, it starts going well, you add a bit on, you start expanding it a bit, and then all of a sudden it starts getting a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. But because of that, there are certainly defined stages. And we talk to our franchise about some of those stages, about what they are and what kind of different experiences that you will have during those times and how to overcome them, because it is a journey and nothing is ever right. You're always trying to improve something. You're always trying to make something better. But each section of that journey needs to be negotiated before you move on to the next section. And the challenges actually remain the same pretty much throughout all of those journeys or all of those sections. But the numbers just get bigger.
We always touch on, in terms of your decision to franchise, obviously kind of already done it with the kind of the Bristol and the Norfolk connection, doing it that way. What was your journey in franchising? I guess it's a journey for the group as well. And how did that come about? Like, did you always know you were going to franchise? And I guess what was the decision to go that route rather than an organic growth across the country?
So years ago, I worked for a company that did football camps before I got into full-time football coaching in a professional club. I used to do some football camps for a private company. And I ended up buying that company and then selling it on when I went into football full-time. And I always found that the reach was limited in terms of, to kind of get the scale, it was very difficult to get the scale operating like that on that model. And I saw the birth of football in the community schemes. And again, all the same issues to growth. And when I set up Premier in 1999, we ran the holiday courses that summer, and then straight away in September started to franchise. Now,
So like after, was that 5 or 6 months? Was it?
Yeah. It was taking those 3 guys who were working with us. 2 of them, as I said, are still with us and doing great stuff and great guns and part of the senior leadership team. The other one went on to a career in professional football, ended up with Wales, with Liverpool, and still works in professional football now. So it was a good little crew. But let me put it into perspective. The franchising support, the franchising setup, the franchising agreement looks nothing like it looks now as it did then. The concept was there. The concept was that we would grow and expand by working with partners, in this case franchises, who would grow and expand. That's the concept. And we did that, and I did that for a little period of time. I did that for, as I said, probably about 7 or 8 years as an owner-operator. And then after that, started to get really serious. And one of the first things that helped get me really serious was when I spoke to our bank, when I spoke to the franchise advisor at the NatWest, who's still there, when I spoke to people who were franchise experts, franchise consultancy experts, my question to them was, tell me the one person in this country I can go and speak to who can help me set up a brilliant franchise organisation. And all 3 people said the same person, interestingly. So all 3 people that I spoke to all said the same person. They actually called him, they said he looks nothing like him, but he is the David Beckham of franchising. Go and speak to the guy. And he was a former chair of the British Franchise Association. I went and spoke to him, took him out for lunch in Nottingham, told him what we did. And eventually he became our chair and was our chair for about 10 years. And of course, the sort of things you learn from somebody who's already built a huge franchise network, sold it, been chair of the British Franchise Association, about what agreements look like, about what standard practice needs to be, about what excellent practice looks like, and what we need to do to be an excellent franchisor, invaluable. And they're the things that we put into our business, into our system, and most of those things we still do.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, growing at that point, I've definitely mentorship and finding that right person and your team as well. You built a great team from the start, really. Really interested to hear about how you scaled up from there. So was it a case of I mentioned before about outside investment, etc. Did you ever have to take anything on, any investment on externally, or sell any equity or anything like that, just to be able to rapidly grow like you have?
Well, to begin with, as I said, for the first few years when I was an owner-operator, we just grew organically, and it was people who were growing through recommendation. And as a result of that, we ended up with, I think it was about 20 odd franchises at the time. And they were very much, the franchise business and the franchise agreement at that time was very much something that was a single operator, single unit operator. You know, they were going out and earning a living, basically. And they've evolved with us. Some of them early ones in particular have evolved with us, because what then happened after 7 or 8 years, I had an approach to sell some equity in the business, and we took some finance on to go and really expand the business. And what that helped us to do is didn't go exactly as we planned it to, but it certainly helped us to expand and understand, certainly me to understand, that if I'm going to build a business, I can't be an owner-operator anymore. It has to be different. And in terms of franchise recruitment, which was your question, that was when we altered our approach to being, it didn't become organic anymore. It became, okay, how are we going to take on X amount of franchises a year? How are we going to grow their businesses with them? How are we going to support them to do that? What processes, what systems, what underpinning knowledge do they need to know, and how do we deliver it? And that was when I really realised that actually the business of operating a franchise isn't simply, this is what we do, if you copy it, you'll be fine. And I see that a lot. I see it with a lot of franchises, not just in our sector. I see it a lot in our sector. And when I kind of see that, I know that is, from our journey, that is certainly not what you should be doing, because you can't, that is not, I mean, if a franchisee has to go down the same journey as we did, I'm doing something wrong.
Personal development is a key interest of mine, and I've enjoyed hearing the tactics, habits, and routines of fellow CEOs and leaders, and what helps them to perform at a high level.
And leaves me outside. I'm someone who's always been active. I'm still in the gym 3 times a week. I play very hard tennis, 2 hours without breaks on Friday, and I'm very active with the children, family, and dogs all weekend. If I'm not active myself, I'm just insanely, built up and just cannot sit down. So, not just I'm over, energized. It's part of my routine, and I love it. And my best thinking time, where I'll come up with my best initiatives, including the Ian Wright support group, which we did with the kids, is come from being active, doing an activity, and then going in the sauna for 20 minutes. I just wish someone would invent a pad which doesn't run when you write something down in the sauna. It ruins all my good ideas. But my best ideas come from being active and then just having a chill out time afterwards.
Yeah, I don't know about peak performance. I do my best, but like I do in work, I kind of approach my home life the same. Try and keep some structure, keep some routine. Me and my wife, we've got a young child, which is difficult to manage in itself. So making sure I set my alarm, get up at the same time every morning. Even my drive to work in the morning is 15 minutes to reflect on yesterday and the day ahead today. I mentioned before, I've got plenty of lists. Make sure I take lunch around the same time. Just helps me keep structure. I mean, it's not always possible, but I guess it helps you balance the home and life work as well. That was probably the most difficult thing through the pandemic, the fact that we didn't have the structure of the office to come to, and it was difficult to separate the two, home life, family life, and work. So I think that's really, really important to me, because the work is a passion of mine. It's something that I really focus on. Obviously, you still need to be able to turn off and enjoy life at home with family, because it's only fair.
I have lots of things that I'd like to do and then I don't do. I'm like, I should do this and I should be very organized and make these lists, but I'm not. I'm a little bit like last minute or a bit crazy. I think my saving grace and what keeps me sane is that I would talk about this for fun, which is really annoying for my friends and family, because I do talk about it for fun. And they're like, is this really what we're talking about again on a Friday evening? But I love it. And I think for me, it doesn't feel like, of course, there are days that are horrible. And of course, there are days, currently my day to day is filling out insurance paperwork. It's horrible. And, but everybody has days like that. But I think for the most part, I genuinely love what I do. And I genuinely love the organizations I work with. And I feel a sense of purpose. And that keeps me going even when things are crazy, right? And I think you have to find, and everybody has to do this for themselves. Not everybody is lucky enough to have a job that they love 100% of the time, or even 10% of the time. I think you find the bits within it that give you joy, that give you purpose, right? And you balance that out, and you focus on, what am I doing for my community, for my work, for my team? Like for me, that's how I look at this, is what am I doing for me? Because it's really important to do stuff for you. What am I doing for my team? What am I doing for my clients? What am I doing for my community? And you find an in-between of that Venn diagram that's like your purpose.
He's got a famous saying, which I took from his speech, and which was, change happens in the diary. And if you put it in the diary and you allocate the time to do it, and you do it, it gets, you make progress. And in terms of daily routines, people will laugh that know me or work with me, because that is all I continually talk about. Is exactly that. Keep your routine, to the point where a few weeks ago in one of our staff assemblies, we call them, we kind of banned the word ad hoc, because it's not ad hoc, because it'll be something that has happened before. If it's a complete one-off event, yeah, that might be ad hoc, but then put that in the unplanned events bucket, put some time aside to deal with unplanned events. But other than that, nothing is ad hoc. It's always something that's recurring or predictable in some shape or form. And therefore you can plan time to deal with that. And my diary now, I could probably look in my diary on a Wednesday afternoon in 5 years' time and tell you exactly at 1 o'clock I'll be doing something around execution. I don't know what it is yet, but I will be. And at 9:30 to 10:30 I'll be dealing with the cash, the finance pillar of the business, because that's what I do every day at that time. And if I don't put it in, I wouldn't do it, and it would slip. So I think that default diary, that routine, as you call it, is absolutely critical. And that is what, if I was going to start and kick myself for 20 years ago that I didn't know that I do know now, that is what I would do.
Companies within our sector all have loads of moving parts and constant challenges. Add in the relentless quest for quality, and you have a recipe for creating stress. Eddie, Christine and Dean explain what they put in place to ensure smooth running of their operations.
I think that they're probably the same challenges now, to be honest, James. I think they're just sometimes on a bigger scale, aren't they, really? So you're dealing either with more people or, larger sums of money, etc. But I think those challenges from sort of day one are not really too different from what they are now. So whether that's operational challenges around getting the right people in or training them, getting them to do the right things, growing challenges. We all want to, or most people want to obviously grow the business. So there's challenges around marketing and sales, standing out from the crowd, being a little bit different, having something that's a unique proposition or an offer is important, especially in what is now a lot more of a crowded space. So obviously being able to stand out a little bit is obviously important. I think no business wants to be commoditized, and I think there's a certain degree of commoditization within our industry. And then if that is the case, it's always a race to the bottom, isn't it? Sometimes for customers who can do it the cheapest, which is not a great position to be in as a business. But yeah, and managing cash flows. I think to answer that, I'd say same problems, just on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I think for most businesses, it seems like, having chatted to a lot of fellow entrepreneurs, I think the biggest challenge is the people. So it's getting the right people in place, people you can trust and who will do a good job. And it was, a constant theme on, the school run with my kids, that because it coincided with classes starting in other parts of the UK, a constant theme that I'd get rung up and by one of the coaches to say, oh, the other coach hasn't shown up. And I'd have to pull the car over, try and keep the kids quiet, and ring all the parents on the list for that class to tell them that the class was cancelled. So it was kind of juggling the logistics around managing people. That was very kind of tricky. I think also the finance side of it, even though I was from a kind of accounting and banking background, that was hard because I didn't want to go out and take out debt, and it was kind of a very finely tuned operation to try and keep growing on this like shoestring budget that we had. I think as a business, it made us have quite, a frugal way of doing things, which, over time has really benefited us, I think, and has meant that we've been able to expand quite quickly, because we haven't really spent vast amounts of money on things that aren't strictly necessary for the business.
Yeah, I mean, staff, any operational business, staff is always the number one bigger challenge. And then, later in life, I guess, is cash flow. When you're growing so quick as I did, cash flow was always quite a big issue. But a lot of the areas that we've come a long way from, I guess, when I started to now are systems. We have many small operators now having to rent a booking system, an online booking system. When I started, it was checks. I don't even know those, James. Checks used to be written.
Major setbacks can seem like the end of the world at the time. And coming back is tough, but everyone has been through it. Here are some of the key learning opportunities that were thrown at our guests and how it helped them to build a stronger business.
But in the early days, it wasn't really about a business plan. It was around thinking, how am I going to cope with a bigger issue, which a lot of your listeners and potential small business owners would have, which is when Mr. Dean is not there, is the quality and enthusiasm and the values and the professionalism and the desire, et cetera, still remain. And that's the biggest challenge of our sector, is making sure that in those days, who and where is there another Mr. Dean? Because when I wasn't there at the early days, my 40 went to 14. And I very quickly realized that we're only as ever good as the last coach with the last child in our setting, which hasn't changed to date. And so therefore, it was my job to come up with a training and support program for inducting and engaging those staff and supporting them on a journey to be able to deliver the high quality, but more importantly, the engaging environment for the children, where actually the children had no idea they've just run 2 miles in an hour and a half session. They just thought they're playing games and having fun. And that's the key to success, is the children are very simple. They want to do things, they have fun. And unfortunately, I had a lot of coaches in the early days who thought that it was a good idea to talk 20 minutes about a tactic.
No, I mean, I did try it. For me, obviously it's a vehicle for growth. It's a model of distributing your business. And we tried it, and I just thought it limits you on, I'd say, quality. You obviously have to manage the quality a lot, and I found that a lot of franchises I come across are only as good, or franchise or businesses are only as good as the best franchise or the worst franchise. So you have, a franchise up north that could be absolutely incredible, and the franchise down south that's not doing very good. Yet they own a region or a territory that could be turning over £1 million, but they're quite happy turning over 300 grand because it's a lifestyle business. So you've got 700 grand's worth of potential market that you're losing out on because that franchisee in that area isn't maximising it, if that makes sense.
It's in terms of not just the quality, so there's the quality of delivery and that control of keeping in charge of how your quality of your product, but also, that quality of performance, like you said, kind of being able to drive people who might not be as maybe ambitious as yourself to take hold of the full opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. It came down to quality for me, ultimately. And I know there's ways you can manage and sort of assess the quality of your franchisees as a franchisor, but I felt at the time that we'd have much better control on the organisation, on the quality of not just the delivery, but the standards of staffing, how we recruited staff, with people being core to our business. We felt that we were to have full control on who we brought into the business, which I don't feel you'd have as much control on as a franchisor, although you might think you do. The visibility probably isn't as where we'd like it to be. So like I say, we did start, we got burned. The person who took on the franchise, decided to then set up on his own under a different brand and effectively took our operations manual, took all our know-how and kind of ran. Now we had an operation, we had a franchise agreement sort of this thick, and we could have pursued it, but we decided not to. He was actually a friend of mine at the time. I still speak to him, funnily enough, and I look at it. I take learning from it ultimately. I don't tend to get angry with things like that. I just take the learning out of every situation and apply it to how I'm going to operate in future. So for me, it was right. That just confirms that franchising isn't the way for me personally. I'm not saying it's not right for everyone, it's just it wasn't right for me at the time.
Should I say COVID?
yeah, let's get into that. Yeah, for sure.
Taking apart, that has obviously provided, I suppose, challenges for us and probably all the listeners that are probably listening on this as well. I think a lot of it probably, which COVID obviously has impacted on, is probably the biggest challenges have always been sort of cash flow, really, not having enough cash to actually, whether that's grow the business, you know, or COVID related, you know, some of the outgoings that are going out and some of your direct costs. But yeah, I think they've been some of the biggest challenges, and a lesson learned there for any business owners. You need to understand your numbers. You know, if you do not understand your business numbers, and that's you that's listening, then you really do need to either have a really good accountant that can support you. But then again, if you've got a really good accountant, I think you need to understand it yourself, because you've got to be able to ask him the right questions. But there's plenty of people out there that you can learn from or you can read stuff on. But yeah, you've got to have a grasp of your business numbers, and you need to know whether you're winning or losing. Because if you don't know that, then it makes it hard for you to actually start scaling something up and growing it. Because if there are weaknesses and flaws in your business, you start scaling it.
2020 has been an extraordinary year. The awareness of diversity in sport was brought front and centre by the Black Lives Matter movement. Preeti Shetty articulated the state of the industry in our conversation, and Jack Shakespeare added the UK active perspective.
Have I seen distance travelled? In some sense. Do I think it's far enough? Absolutely not. I think the last year has just brought to the surface, and actually it's a journey that started in 2016 with Brexit, you know, has brought to the surface a lot of these opinions, a lot of the issues that we have in our sector when it comes to diversity. I think there's been progress in terms of, you know, the UK governance code and women on boards and that kind of thing. Still a long way to go. I think we're missing the intersectionality. You know, there's lots of stuff around women. What about Black women? What about, you know what I mean? What about women that are disabled?
And I guess that's why you don't like the term BAME. I guess like lumping everyone into the same.
And it's doing us a disservice by lumping us into the same pot, because it's really easy to look at this and say, that's fine, I've got 4 Asians. That's not, yeah, but you have no Black people. Do you see what I mean? Like, you can't, what you're doing is pitting us against each other by doing that. And that's the last thing we need, is to pit us against each other. And also, we're not necessarily the minority globally, right? So, you know, I think you said something really important, and it's where my focus is. I think there's a lot of people looking at boards, right? It's been everywhere. We know there's not enough diversity on boards. There are hundreds of programs, and I think this is everybody's solution. Let's start a leadership program to get more people of color on boards, more women on boards. I don't think it's about just the courses. There also need to be the opportunities. You know, there's 100 people that have been on courses. Where are the jobs? They're still not getting the jobs. For me, it is the exec. It's senior management and middle management. That's where we need the diversity, because they are the ones that are not moving up, right? And nobody, you know, we don't publish this data. I've been trying to look at it for ages. Where is the data on employee makeup of sport organizations in the UK? We can't see it. And therefore, I think that's the level we need to focus on. And you know, there is a little bit here about, you know, unconscious bias. And there was a period we all went through unconscious bias training, right? It's more than unconscious bias. It needs to be positive action, right? And, you know, for me, you can send 100 people on courses. You can create 100 of these, you know, these board ready, management ready things that people can go on. At the end of the day, if your interview panel is white male and over 50, I'll tell you what, the odds are I'm probably not getting this job, right? And that's not because they're all racist. That's not what anybody is saying. We're saying it's a systemic thing. The problem is with the system. You know, we're not enough people are getting through. And if we're not representative of the communities that we live and work in, then we have a problem. And that's all that we're trying to be, is representative of the communities that you live and work in. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We haven't done any specific research on that, but I think what we do know is that we need to absolutely enable and facilitate locally led action and activation on the ground. You know, and and children need to have access to positive role models that look like them, that sound like them, that really can really set and show that positive example. And I think that comes with, you're right, James, that comes with supporting developing a really diverse workforce. It's huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah.
And no better to start than through grassroots community, youth, sport and physical activity programs and give them the platforms, the resources, the support to really drive that. I think it's absolutely massive. There's probably a lot more work that needs to be done in that space, but putting the right positive role models in front of these children and young people is really, really important.
When you start out in business, you just don't know what you don't know. We ask all our guests one simple question. If you could go back and give yourself advice at the start of the journey, what would it be?
I think it would be, don't give away equity unless you absolutely have to. So I've had a couple of instances over the years where, a couple of times I've had to remortgage my house. It's been kind of buying back equity in the business. And the crazy thing is, when you chat to your team about equity and things, most people actually aren't that interested in equity anyway. They'd rather get a bigger bonus or something like that. So people don't really value equity, but then when you actually need to buy it back, it can be really, really challenging, particularly if you've kind of slogged away at growing the business and really increased the value of the business. So I think don't give away your business too lightly, because when you start it and it's not really worth anything, it's easy to just say, oh, well, I'll just give this person 30% of this, but, and actually you don't know what it's going to grow into and why are you starting a business unless you think it's going to turn into something really fantastic and really big. And I think that would probably be the message I'd give to my earlier self, is that actually this is going to work. Have faith and don't give away all your equity.
Yeah, I think the thing I would probably go back and maybe not change the most, but the advice I would give is just to be open-minded, because there's not necessarily just one way to do something. There's often lots of alternatives. So, like I said, I it's slightly hypocritical. I did the mainstream, go to A-level, go to university, get myself a job. That's not necessarily the best pathway. And as we evolve over the years, it definitely changes. So I would definitely be a little bit more open-minded to the different opportunities, looking out for different ways to gain experience and that kind of stuff, for sure.
One of my biggest regrets, I loved teaching, I loved school leadership, but I wish I'd left earlier so Tactivate would have been further on the journey by now. I also wish when I'd started off with Tactivate, I'd had the balls, for want of a better term, to just grab Tactivate completely rather than doing consultancy for others. Don't get me wrong, I brought on a lot of stuff from working with other people, but ultimately I wish I just dived into Tactivate completely, because we would have been so much further on the journey than now. And then the other thing is, one of the reasons I left teaching was I was doing stuff that was against my core values. And I do think in terms of, there are a lot of teachers out there who are ticking boxes, going through the motions because they have to do it. But ultimately, just, find that job, find that thing in terms of something that works and plays for you. And surround yourself with good people. Surround yourself with good people who are going to provoke you as well as support you.
I think, I try and be quite good at this, but I think everybody struggles with it. I think the message would be, don't be scared to try things. Like, don't be scared to fail. I think people are so scared, especially as you're starting out, and you're scared to do things, and it's easier to be safe and just take the safe option. And I think for me in my career, I've never said no to anything. I always try and I take risks, and it's always worked for me. And when it hasn't, I have failed multiple times. That's okay. And you pick yourself up and you learn from it and you try again. And I think I wish I had started that earlier. At 21, I was playing things pretty safe. And I think that would be the advice, is just try things and don't be worried about failing. Anything that happens to you that early in your life, it's not gonna scar you for the rest of your life. You'll just learn from it.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_Ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.